All right, it's 3 o'clock then. So welcome back, everyone, and good afternoon. My name's Paul Moore. I'm the director of the Stanley Burton Centre for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and it's a great pleasure to be here to represent the centre, which is the University of Leicester's dedicated Holocaust Research Centre, and in fact the oldest such centre at a British university. And it's a particular pleasure to be able to chair this panel on memory projects, and I'll introduce the speakers one after another, so to speak. So I'll introduce our first speaker and then hand over immediately to him for his paper. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Martin Van Der Hayden. I hope I've pronounced your surname correctly.
Very well.
Fantastic, thank you. That's a great relief. Martin graduated from the Gerrit Rietveld, I hope that's right too, Art Academy in Amsterdam in the year 2010. His work there involved photo collages reflecting his own Jewish second generation identity. And Martin, in his paper, will be talking about his own museum, his own project, the Jewish Second Generation Art and Family Museum in Amsterdam. And indeed, his paper is entitled The Jewish Second Generation Art and Family Museum, Amsterdam, a Personal and Collective Memory Project. And without any further ado, I'll hand over to Martin for what I'm sure will be a fascinating paper. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And all, thank you very much for the invitation to present the paper here on this very interesting symposium. Till now, I really regret that it's not possible to meet you in the real world, because it would be very nice to talk with you all, but I attended this morning, and it's really a pity that I'm sitting here in my own room in Amsterdam. So the next view, please. Yeah. After a short introduction, I will tell you about the three precursors of the JOMA, and next I will give you some citations about my art, and I will conclude the paper with three conclusions. During the lonely Corona weeks, I made a little book. It's a kind of museum guide with the art historical as well as personal backgrounds of the JOMA. In this 20-minute presentation, I will try to mention the most important points of the text, and I will show you some of the illustrations from the book. The JOMA is an artwork in progress, beautifully located here in my house, downstairs where I'm sitting, just where I'm sitting, in the 100 square meter basement of my own house here at Brouwersgracht in the center of Amsterdam. It combines my visual art with the stories of my family. There's also a learning and education center. In the book I mentioned before, you will find my curriculum vitae, but for now I will summarize my career in the following three sentences. I'm from 1947, just after the war, and I have a career as a double bass player in Baroque orchestras, and I've been a university teacher and a psychologist. From 2005, I studied, so at my old age, I studied at the Gerrit Rietveld Art Academy here in Amsterdam, where I graduated in 2010 with, Paul already told it to you, with photo collages reflecting my Jewish second generation identity. An important precursor of the JOMA is 141 boxes. It's a conceptual autobiographical archive artwork. In 2008, the third year of the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, I got stuck. The beauty and the horror and the anger seemed to be stranded in cliches, and the teachers pursued an active policy of discouragement. Stop that Holocaust. After lessons on conceptual art, I decided to take a different direction, 141 boxes. There were 141 moving boxes here next to me, just left, in my house at the Brouwersgracht. Most, and it's a real lot, 141 moving boxes, big ones. Most of the moving boxes were stacked in long rows of 5 layers high in the monumental corridor. Some had been there for more than 15 years. I had no idea what was in them anymore. I started with the project 141 Boxes, an autobiographical, archive and media artwork about unpacking, archiving, photographing and tidying up the 141 boxes and their content. The JOMA can be seen as the continuation of that 141 Boxes project. In the spring of 2011, just after I finished the art school, I exhibited my work in the small synagogue in the village of Borne. The synagogue was designed and built in 1842 by my Jewish ancestor, Salomon Jacob Spanjaard, the founder of the Spanjaard textile factories. The exhibition was called Maarten, an installation dedicated to my grandfather, Martin Spanjaard, who was born in Borne, and I am named after this grandfather I never knew. I studied psychology in Groningen, and I lived there for years with my girlfriend around the corner from the large synagogue in the Volkingenstraat. I walked hundreds of times past that synagogue building. I didn't even notice the Star of David in the facade. Denial and defense. Really painfully and embarrassing, I think now, looking back. In 2016, the synagogue had been restored to all its glory, and I don't know if you have ever been there, but it's a very beautiful architecture, that synagogue. So I had there a solo exhibition, and the title of that exhibition was Abrahamic. The arrangement of my work in space has resulted in a single total installation, a critical commentary on church, mosque and synagogue. In the JOMA, I combine my visual art with the 8 family stories I've been telling in secondary schools since 2015 in collaboration with Camp Westerbork Memorial Center. So that's the idea after this whole project. I have my art, and on these schools, secondary schools, I tell these stories that I heard of my family, of course, because I have not had this experience myself, but also my second generation experience. So that, and I will summarize now some of these stories of my family here, very short. Yeah. The story of Martin Spanjaard, it's the grandfather who I never knew. Martin studied music in Berlin and in 1920 became the conductor, musical director of the Arnhemse Orkestvereniging. In the Muziekverein in Vienna in 1930, he led the Vienna Philharmonic in a sold-out premiere of Stravinsky's Capriccio with the composer, Stravinsky, at the piano. In June 1939, Martin Spanjaard conducted the Concertgebouw Orchestra here in Amsterdam. I played there too. They played Mozart, Bosmans, it's a Jewish composer, a woman, and Bruckner. It was his last concert. In 1942, he was murdered in Auschwitz.
Oh.
My mother, Klaar Spanjaard, was a beautiful and intelligent girl. She had many friends. She was 17 when the war broke out. In 1941, she had to go to another school, the Jewish Lyceum Fischerstraat. She had also to wear a Star of David, and she was no longer allowed to see her best friend who was not Jewish. My mother hated being at that school. My mother survived the war because she was declared half Jewish by lying and with the help of a so-called good German, Hans-Georg Kallmeier. She was arrested 3 times and put in prison in Scheveningen in The Hague, called the Oranje Hotel. She was interrogated by Franz Fischer. He wanted to know the address of her Jewish mother, but the 18-year-old Klaar never disclosed the address of Omi. And my mother became, after the war, psychoanalytical child therapist. Yes, it's okay. Here I am with my grandmother, and most of my nicest and most beautiful childhood memories are not with my mother, but of experiences with Omi, the above-mentioned grandmother, Clara Spanjaard van Lier. The holidays in the Julianahof in The Hague, the trips in the blue tram to Scheveningen, the fireworks from the terrace of the Kurhaus, my first symphonic concerto with Rudolf Virkushny at the piano. Omi survived the war by going into hiding. But Omi was a rather vivacious and enterprising person. She could not bear the hiding and took a suicide pill. Her daughter, Klaartje, my mother, had to decide whether or not they would drain Omi's stomach in the hospital. My mother decided to do so. And I'm very glad she did so. One of my many psychotherapists said once during a therapy session, "The beauty in your works comes from your grandmother, the horror comes from your mother." I hate to speak about my own art in art historical terms, so I will quote the words that two art historians and a rabbi said about my artworks. The Israeli art historian David Sperber writes the following, and I quote, "Van Der Hayden's works are created with digital means. At first glance, his works are uplifting, beautiful and pleasant. A closer look at these works reveals that their forms consist of complex and atrocious images of naked bodies, images all of which were taken from photographs made by American, and I should ask also Russian, soldiers when they liberated the concentration camps at the end of Second World War. These works combine eros and thanatos. It seems that, in the subtext of his works, the artist raises a significantly critical point by juxtaposing beauty with evil and horror. The main point of all his various works seems to emphasize that not only in the past was evil, cruelty, and wickedness concealed by beauty, but also today. Even though the images of war and horror are common today, when it comes to the Shoah, and in particular in the European context, the contemporary eye prefers to look away. In this reality, Van Der Hayden is fiercely protesting, "You may not look away," and it seems to come from Deuteronomium 22. End of quote. And this is a detail of that work you saw before. Art historian Aaron Rosen writes, and I quote, "As an author who writes frequently on modern art and contemporary art, I find it takes a lot these days to shock me in a gallery. The perversities of the Chapman brothers, the excretions of Andres Serrano, the impieties of Damien Hirst, none of the usual suspects manage to elicit a gasp or even a much of a grimace these days. The only time in recent memory when I can recall feeling genuine, toe-curling, blood-curdling shock was when I first spent time looking at the works of Martin Van Der Hayden. And what was novel, moreover, was that this shock crept upon me. Maarten, a trained psychologist among his many traits, is not merely devoted to the meticulous creation of these disturbing works, but to studying the effects they have on his viewers. Maarten's analysis is important." End of quote. I'm now a member of the liberal Jewish community here in Amsterdam, and one of our rabbis, Tamara Benima, said the following, and I quote, "The images are there. There must be something done with them. The reality is there. There must be something done with it. With the way Maarten did that something, he has placed himself in the middle of the Jewish tradition. Maarten's work testifies to the unbroken will to live. With the shit, something meaningful is created. Out of the intolerable, something tolerable. From the Ordnung des Todes to the order of the Jewish artist. Martin Van Der Hayden has taken his responsibility by giving the Jewish suffering an artistic shape, a shape that leads in a conscious way to the questions that should be asked, and that in an almost cheerful manner explains, it's been, it's still there, it's not gone, it will always remain, but we go further. End of quote. Enough words about my art. I will conclude the paper with 3 conclusions about the nature of the JOMA, the museum I am making, and it's nearly finished, in my basement here at my home. Yeah, it's okay. So my first conclusion is the JOMA is a personal, very personal, as well as a collective project. The JOMA is the result of the sublimation. Yes, we had it this morning about Freud, and to my opinion, that's my interpretation. All this work is a sublimation of my second generation psychological conflicts. In this sense, the JOMA is a highly personal ego document. Christian Boltanski says in this respect, and I quote, "There's the artist who has a problem and tries to resolve it by making an object. And the person who looks at it has more or less the same problem and is also going to resolve it a little bit while looking at it. The artist has to be someone who resolves his own problems, speaks more or less about himself, and who is able to resolve the problems of others, is able to pose questions to others." End of quote. The JOMA raises many questions among the visitors, and I'm an inseparable part of this ego document. I'm present in the JOMA, and you can ask me anything you want. In this sense, the JOMA is a kind of relational art or art of encounter. I think dialogue is essential. In addition, in the Education and Research Center of the JOMA, the many written ego documents of Jewish second-generation writers, and there are a lot at this moment in Holland, there are a lot of books of second-generation writers are edited. In my paper, I name them all. So the books are presented in the library of the Education Center of the JOMA, here downstairs. So my conclusion is the JOMA is as well personal and also collective. In the second place, the JOMA is a post-memory as well as a memory project. Now, you know all art historian Marianne Hirsch. She coined the concept of post-memory, and she writes, and I quote, maybe it's not so interesting for you, but you know it all, but okay. Post-memory's connection to the past is thus not actually mediated by recall, but by imaginative investment, projection, and creation. End of quote. In this sense, the JOMA is clearly a post-memory project. But Marianne Hirsch also writes in the context of second-generation art, and I quote, "At stake is precisely the guardianship of a traumatic personal and generational past with which some of us have a living connection, and that past is passing into history." End of quote. And in the same sense, Ernst van Alphen, you all know them, he writes, and I quote, "Despite all kinds of disagreements, the debate about the representation of the Holocaust is strikingly unanimous on one point. Holocaust survivors, as well as later generations, have a special responsibility to keep the memory of the events alive." And I'm also putting some objects here in the museum. So it's interesting. Well, we have this whole discussion was this morning. So I conclude that the JOMA is both a memory as well as a post-memory project. And my third conclusion is that the JOMA will be an effective place for human rights education. As I said before, since 2015, I am telling my own stories at giving school lessons, human rights education, and citizenship on the basis of my family stories and my own second generation story. These lessons I give in secondary schools in collaboration with Camp Westerbork Memorial Center, and the lessons in press and are successful. These students are really very much interested, always. I never had difficult experiences, and it was very, very interesting. I intend to invite groups of secondary school students to the JOMA, to my museum, for human rights classes. And as I said before, I consider myself as a part of the JOMA, of the museum. And since 2015, I have experienced that the dialogue of a second generation Jew is very instructive in the context of human rights education. Meeting a real Jew in the flesh is for the students very exceptional. Yes, there are not so many Jews anymore, isn't it? So they never have met a real Jew. So a dialogue with a Jew appears to be very instructive. So at the end, all the references, please deny the next slide. Yes. So all the references and the sources of what I told you is in that little book. And you can, I hope to meet you sometime, some of you in maybe in the JOMA, and the book you can buy at my website. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maarten, for a very thought-provoking and engaging paper. Thank you also for keeping time so expertly, and I can see people already taking the digital option of the applause symbol, so show your appreciation in whichever way you'd like for a fascinating paper. Thank you, Maarten. So we'll follow, of course, the format of previous panels, in that we'll go straight on to the second paper, and we'll have some time for question and answers at the very end. So we move on now then to the second of our two panelists for this particular panel, which is Dr. Alexandra Carl, and she's very kindly joining us today from Utah, I believe, so has consented to a breakfast time presentation, which is very unusual and also very, very generous of her. Dr. Karl is a critic, a curator, and an educator. She attained her MA in art history from Munich, where she was also assistant curator at the Städtische Galerie in Munich's wonderful Lenbach House. She then went on to do a PhD at Cambridge, and that was on Darwinism in German-speaking artists from the 19th century. And most recently, she curated the show Wildfires in Utah, Art, Homes and Lands, which was exhibited at Bountiful Davis Art Center in Bountiful, Utah, and I believe closed as recently as just a few weeks ago in mid-February this year. So just about dodging COVID restrictions, I suppose. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Carl for her paper.
Thank you, Paul. You all can hear me. Okay. I am a bit far afield. Greetings from Salt Lake City. It is it's not so early. It's 8:30 almost. Anyways, I'd like to thank Paul and Doctors Wiltshire and Louwagie for organizing the exhibition, and apologies for mispronouncing your names. I'm Alexandra Carl, and I want to tell you a little bit about this project that I organized in 2010. So over 10 years ago, which I brought to schools in Salt Lake City both private and public schools, between 2010 and 2016. Before I tell you about it specifically, I'll just outline a number of reasons that brought me to the project. Besides being the daughter of a surviving family, I guess the first reason was that I was working in a synagogue here as an art teacher and already creating art projects around Jewish themes. And so I had been sort of tiptoeing around the theme of the Holocaust. How do you teach that to, or introduce it to children? So that was the first reason. Secondly, I'm an art historian, and I became really fascinated with the idea of this question of how do you represent the unimaginable? How do you, something that is supposedly beyond representation, how do you address that? And finally, I had seen a video of one project. I'm not sure if it was mentioned already in the conference, called Paperclips, which was a project that was done somewhere in the American South. I want to say maybe Georgia. I had a lot of problems with that project. And so I really was thinking deeply about how to humanize the subject, and again, how to bring it to children. And a couple of things struck me, particularly after seeing the Paperclips video, is that I did not want to talk about the numbers. Paperclips is really focused on achieving it's a project where children collect 6 million paperclips to represent the numbers of people that were killed. And I wanted to get away from that massive number and actually create a project that is really one-on-one, an experience between one living child and one victim that had perished. And for me, that that simplicity really brought home or created a space for some kind of connection between the children of today. So my project hasn't really changed a lot over the 6 years that I conducted it. Starts, I guess, with an invitation into a classroom. I walk in with this wonderful basket, which has all of the materials that I need. It's a very simple project. And before I hand out the materials, I start a little conversation with the kids. And I ask them what they know about the Holocaust. Have they heard this word before? Remember, these are children in the American West, and it's not, depending on what school they're at, it's not necessarily part of the curriculum. If it is, it's very, very superficially treated. So not all of them have heard this word before. And so I asked them what they know. Have they heard it? What do they think happened? Who was impacted by it? That's all. Have they heard the word genocide before? Who did that affect? These very basic foundational questions are really have been very fruitful. There's a lot of confusion around those words. Many children associate the word Holocaust with 9/11, or also with various other historical events that are kind of cloudy in their minds. They associate it also with the internment of Japanese Americans in the American West, which they do know about, but that's not technically a Holocaust. genocide. They don't know about any other genocides, or they're not terribly familiar with that word, but they do occasionally connect it with the what happened to Indigenous people here, which is so they know that. Anyways, so we have a small conversation, and then I start to hand out some photographs. They're laminated, and I explain that this is something that happened to my family. I also clarify that didn't just affect Jews, but people from the LGBT community, people with disabilities, different abilities, and so on, gypsies, that kind of thing. Anyways, I hand out these laminated photographs, which are of my family. This, you might be able to see, there's a little heart here on this girl is my grandmother. And I explained to them that these are my, this is my family. This photo was taken in 1911. And this one is from 1950. Here's my grandmother again. This is my dad, my grandfather, other great aunts and uncles. And I explained to them that with this first photograph, which was taken in 1911, showing the 13 siblings in my grandmother's family, this group grew to about 85 members by the time the war the Second World War came around, because these people grew up, they married, they had children, some of them had grandchildren. And the next family photo is this. In 1950 was the first time that anybody was able to get back together again and have a reunion in Budapest. And there were 15 people that survived out of the group of 85. So that's it's sort of important for me to establish that this really happened to my family. It's not just a story in a textbook or happened to somebody else. Another thing that I pass around is this list, which I compiled using the Yad Vashem online database. It lists all of the members in that initial family, and has their life dates, birth and death dates. And I asked the kids to go through and see how many of the people in this one family died in 1944. And if they have good math skills, I asked them how old they were when they died. Many of them were in their 20s. There are younger people, and even a couple of one or two who were infants, who were 1 year old. And I also ask them to try to pronounce their names, and that's probably the most poignant part of the project, is hearing living children pronounce the names of my perished relatives. I really, that's a form of remembrance, really, or memorial for me. After that, I give them all one of these handouts. These are printouts that I've simply printed from Google. They are photographs of, sorry, you might be able to see, you may have seen them before, of real people who were incarcerated. And these are the processing photos, as they entered the camps. We all know their personal property was taken away from them, their clothes were taken, and they were given these uniforms, their heads were shaved, and they were photographed, given a number, and processed. And some of these images are available on the internet. Just as an aside, I would love to find where the repository, there must be millions of these photographs somewhere. I'd love to know where they are. If I were going to expand my project, I'd love to work with a larger collection of photographs. I have reached out to the Red Cross alternately, and also the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and nobody can really help me with that. But anyway, that's an aside. So I give the students one of these handouts, and while they're looking at them, I give them they're given a sketchbook and a pencil, and I give them a very simple tutorial on portraiture, how to look at another person's face, how to make a drawing of somebody else. Which, of course, is something that strikes fear into the hearts of most people, let alone school children. But I just do a simple demonstration on the whiteboard, really just 2 or 3 minutes, talking about the shapes of people's heads. Do they have a rectangular shaped head, an oblong head, triangular with a pointed chin? How about the placement of their eyes? Are they close together? Are they on the edge of their skulls? What do their eyebrows tell you? What sort of shape do the eyebrows have? Are they angry? Are they curious? What kind of nose? A small nose, a larger nose, a large mouth, small mouth? Are they smiling? Are they scowling? Just very simple. I just do a few simple sketches on the board to give them some sort of an entry into how they're going to look at the photograph that they have. And then they're given some, like I said, they start sketching. And here I've got a couple of sketches. And while they are sketching, they generally tend to notice things, little details in the photo that might spark their curiosity. They might start talking about the uniforms. There's usually some conversation that comes out of the star on the person's lapel. And, these are really fruitful conversations with American school children who live in an area where there's not a large Jewish population. So some of them will say, "What's that? What is that star there? What's that doing?" And I was in a conversation where one of the kids put their hand up. I know what that is. It's the sign of the devil. And so, that's a really wonderful opportunity to correct them and to tell them what this star really means and why it's there. There are other conversations. Why don't they have any hair? What else is going on in the photographs? So those are some of the pencil sketches. And once they've completed those, they are invited to, I'll put down a pile of what's called, these are called here Mexican river pebbles. You can buy a big bag of them at a hardware store for about $10. They're very cheap. All of the materials in this project are very cheap. So I invite them to choose a pebble that, if possible, sort of reflects the shape of the person's head. And then they're given some Sharpie markers, and they're invited to transfer their sketch onto one of these pebbles. And while they're doing that, I'll show you some of them. While they're doing that, I initiate some other conversation. I hope that's the right way up. I initiate some other conversations and invite them to speculate on the person that they're drawing. And maybe I didn't emphasize before that one of the important aspects of this project is that this is not about realism, and it's not necessarily about historical accuracy. And I really emphasize with the children, I don't care whether they make a perfect drawing or not. This is not about, they don't have to, there's always that pressure to make a perfect drawing, a perfect likeness. And I release them from that burden. They can make mistakes. And so I also encourage them under that banner to maybe think a little bit more imaginatively about the person, and just to speculate. They might be wrong, they might be right, but to speculate on who that person is. Are they someone's father, someone's brother, someone's sister, someone's daughter? What might they be thinking in that photograph? Do they look happy? Do they look scared? Some of the photographs have wounds on them. They've blackened eyes, and so they speculate about how that happened. What might they be thinking? Maybe they're thinking that they don't like wearing the uniform. They want to wear their own clothes. Maybe they're unhappy that they had their head shaved. Maybe they're worried about they just got separated from their friend or their sister. Maybe they had to leave a pet behind, and they're worried about who's going to feed the dog. Those kinds of, again, they're not necessarily, may or may not be historically accurate. And I don't care. It's more about the children making some kind of connection with that photograph. I think also because one of the emphases for me, or as an art historian, something that I had been thinking when I thought about the project was the incredible chasm of visual language that children nowadays have to bridge in order to understand the Holocaust. And what I mean by that is that the Holocaust is something that, at least in the primary sources, is documented with still photographs mostly. I guess there are some films, still photographs that are in black and white. And those are two different languages that are quite foreign to children nowadays, who are, as we know, mostly looking at a little tablet, a 2x4 tablet, and they're looking at moving videos in color. So to look at a still photograph of one person and to hold your gaze for 20, 30 minutes and really look at that person's face and think deeply about their life is quite a challenge for the children of today. And who knows what the following generations are going to have to overcome in terms of visual languages. So it was really important to me to create a space for them to stay with that image and stay with that person just for 20 minutes instead of randomly dismissing it because it's a black and white still image. Anyway, so we spend some time speculating on who the person might be, maybe even what their name is. And finally, as they're wrapping up their project, I hand out this. Some of them will be finished at this point with their drawing. I hand out this handout, which has a list of quotations about tolerance. And I should say all of this information is readily found on the website, which is www.portraitpebbles.com. So you can easily go, and there's a tab called Quotes, which has this list of quotes by all kinds of, I think there's maybe 10 or 15 celebrities, authors, thinkers, Martin Luther King, Hemingway, Jonathan Sacks, Marcus Aurelius, Helen Keller, Albert Einstein, Malcolm X, Kofi Annan, just noticing, Dalai Lama, I'm just noticing they're almost all men. I should try and change that. In any case, quotes about tolerance, about getting along with other people, about getting along with people who are different from you. And this is really the final part of the project, where we go down the list, and I ask them to read off their one of the statements, and to really tell me what words don't you understand, what does this mean to you, how does this connect with any lessons you might be learning about bullying, that kind of thing. So we have a brief conversation about that. And that's really it. They're then free to, I guess, depending on what the teacher wants to do, they can take their little portrait pebble home and keep it for themselves. Or the class collectively can choose a place, a quiet corner in the classroom, and put them collectively together to have a little memorial in a place in the classroom, or indeed sometimes some of the schools have gardens, and so they can put them out there, but it's just a sort of makeshift memorial to remember the people who perished. I think that about does it for what Portrait Pebbles is. Like I said, I invite you to check out the website. There are many more images and information about the project. And thank you again for listening to my talk and for inviting me to the conference. Thank you. That's it.